We'll now move on to Module 2, the key elements of a habit. They're good habits and they're bad habits. What we're learning in this module is how to create good habits. When you have a good habit, then information and energy will flow through your body. But if you develop a bad habit, then information will be stuck within the body. And we'll have a look at that at the next slide. So in order to maintain balance, which is homeostasis, you need self-regulation. Now, if you get out of balance, then it can occur right down at the bottom of the nervous system or right up to the top of the head. And you can see in this diagram, you can either go too low or too high. You can at the top be too flexible, all over the place, or too fixed and rigid and won't change your mind. Stubbornness. You can be overly positive or overly negative. You can think too much about yourself, or you can think too much about others, trying to please them. Your emotions can go too high and your anger get out of control, or you get panic attacks, or your emotions can go too flat. You can be overly impulsive, do things on the spur of the moment, or be so slow to change that nothing gets done. You can be overly controlling, trying to control others, or you can be under control, giving up control. Likewise, you can live in a fantasy world, or you can feel hopeless and just give up. So there's a lot of negative outcomes of not maintaining self-balance and not maintaining good habits. We'll now go along and have another deeper look into that area. You to get out of balance. In this slide, we're looking at the three main areas. On the left, it says knowledge, so you can get out of balance in your head. You can lose attachment with others in your heart, and you can lose control within your body. So in your body, you sense things, you have senses. In your heart, you have emotions, and in your head, you have knowledge. Now, under stress, the body down-regulates. And so once you lose your ability and become confused in the head, you then go into your emotions. And if your emotions get out of control, you down-regulate into your body. And right at the bottom, your system can shut down and withdraw. Now, in order to stay in balance, we'll have a look at the 7 rules which help you achieve that. There are 7 rules which are taught to control a bad habit. The first one relates to the conscious versus the subconscious. And we know that all bad habits are held in the subconscious, and there's triggers which activate them, either external triggers or internal triggers. So we learn to understand the conscious and the subconscious effect on bad habits. The second pair is principle thinking versus comparative thinking. It's when we do excessive negative comparative thinking and the principles aren't strong enough to control that we generate a bad habit. Example of the principles, they're called in cognitive principle therapy, they're called influencing principles. And they are self-control, courage, patience, persistence, calmness, and assertiveness. And those principles are used to overcome your negative comparisons. So if you have a look at the next 5, numbers 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, you can resort them into a different order, and it actually comes up with a way of changing a bad habit. So we'll change the order around and show you how those 5 pairs of principles are used to control a bad habit. So we'll look at them in pairs. We'll look at the first 2, influence versus concern and control versus responsibility. Then we'll go on to have a look at support versus challenge and behaviour in the person. And finally, we'll have a look at inside versus outside. I'll just start with looking at control versus responsibility, because these two need to be balanced. Because if a person has too much control and not enough responsibility, they can easily become overly controlling and dominate and become self-centered. So it's important they're balanced. Conversely, if a person has too much responsibility and not enough control, then they can easily develop a lot of anxiety. And so I'll go on now and look at influence versus concern and how that relates to control and responsibility. So influence means I can do something about it, and concern means I can do nothing about it in the definitions that we use in CBT. So to give an example, if I cut grass for a living and I haven't earned any money all week and I can't find any other work, I have a lot of concern and no influence. And therefore, it's no good me blaming the weather because I've got no influence over the weather. I just have to accept it. And that's a very difficult principle to apply, the ability just to unconditionally accept with no conditions where you have concern and no influence. But it's the only way to move through it without creating anxiety or stress within yourself. And it's the basis of the beginning of starting a good habit. So where I've got influence, you'll use influence, because when you've got influence, you've got control. And as we saw, influence and control is necessary. But if you haven't got influence and control, you've got concern and responsibility, which means you can do nothing about it because you've got concern and you decide to take responsibility for it, you will get anxiety. So this is the rule for influence versus concern when dealing with time. So the past is only for knowledge. You only go back to the past to gain knowledge. Once you've got all the knowledge you can from the past, it's pointless going over it because it's very easily then to be an if only person. If only this didn't happen, if only that didn't happen to me. And that's the start of how you get depressed, by going over the past, thinking it could change or hoping it changed, whereas it didn't. The future's for planning, because if you don't have a goal, you're like a cork on an ocean. Whichever way the wind and the tide blows, that's where you can end up, and you can end up in the wrong place. So you need a goal. But once you set a goal, you don't overuse what if, but what if this happens, but what if that happens? Because that will lead to anxiety. So the future's for planning, and the past is for knowledge. And in the present, because you're never in the past, you're never in the future, you're always in the present. You stay in the present, you focus on your logic, you use your principles, and you don't have concern. That is the way to develop a good habit. Control and responsibility. And we saw that if you get that wrong, you can end up with anxiety. You can also end up with blame, blaming yourself, blaming others, or blaming the world. Now we'll have a look at the next two, support versus challenge and behaviour versus the person. Because if you get those wrong, you can cause you to ruminate, which means to continually go over your negative thinking, and you can sort of detach from yourself in a negative way. So we'll move on to those now. So when you get challenged too heavily, you have to draw on support within inside yourself. And here in this slide, we look at the 3 areas of support you need if you're going to achieve a goal under stress. Firstly, you have to be able to trust and respect yourself. Remember, the 4 principles which we use to build relationships are trust and respect and acceptance and commitment. That's between 2 people. But it also applies to yourself when you have a goal to achieve. You've got to trust and respect yourself, and you've got to accept and commit to the goal, because it causes problems if you don't do this. Now, the way you trust and respect yourself is to have knowledge, skill, and experience. And if you look at your life, there's 7 different areas in your life: how you control your physical health, your mental health, your spiritual health, your finances, your partnerships, your community, your financial position. Now, if you've got weaknesses in any one of those areas, it probably is because you don't trust and respect yourself, because you haven't got enough knowledge, skill, and experience. And the more knowledge, skill, and experience you have, the more you can trust and respect yourself. So that's the first element. Then you've got to accept and commit to the job, because you could have all the knowledge, skill, and experience in the world, but you don't really want to be doing that particular job. So you're going to lack commitment, and you won't follow the rules and boundaries or consider the consequences. But that's what's necessary to commit to a job. You have to follow the rules, boundaries and consequences. In a work situation, the boundary ends up being your job description. So when you go to work, you do your job description. You don't do somebody else's job description. You just do your own. And there's policies and procedures there. Why is there policies and procedures there? Because these end up being the rules. Because we don't want to go into work every day and argue how we should do something. You waste too much time. That's why we have rules. And we call them policies in business. But in a personal relationship, they're just called rules, boundaries and consequences. And even a 2-year-old knows about rules, boundaries and consequences, even playing a simple game. They don't get to the next level unless they follow the rules. And they know the rules of the game. And so that's how they progress to the next boundary. And so rules, boundaries and consequences are vital to keep a person safe. So they're the first two aspects. Trust and respect yourself and accept and commit to the job, whatever the job may be. And then we move on to your core beliefs, because if you have a core belief that is a weak core belief, then it's going to put a lot of pressure on your impulse control. The impulse control is what we talked about a few slides ago, which is your self-control and your patience and your calmness and your assertiveness and your ability to be persistent. If you've got a weak core belief such as you're a perfectionist and everything has to be right and everything's not right, then you put too much pressure on yourself and you can easily lose control and not achieve your goal. And so you need to have the three elements in place: the trust and respect, the acceptance and commitment, strong core beliefs, and strong impulse control. Then you can face any challenge that comes your way. Behaviour versus the person. Now, this is the golden rule of this module. And what it states is, when things are positive, they're personal, but when they're negative, they're behavioural. So to give you an example of what that means, say you're raising a 3-year-old child and they come to you with this excellent drawing. It's positive. So you praise the person and the drawing. So oh, well done. That's an excellent drawing. I'm really proud of you. So you're praising the person, you're proud of them, and you're praising the drawing, the excellent drawing. Then later in the day, this 3-year-old sitting up at the table and she refuses to eat her vegetables because she sees the sweets and she's not happy. She stops eating her vegetables. Then you say, oh, you have to eat some of your vegetables before you get the sweets, and she just picks up the plate and smashes it on the ground. So you stop and you say, we've got rules and boundaries in this house. One rule is you eat your vegetables before you get your sweets, and the second rule is you don't throw your plate on the ground, and there's consequences for bad behaviour, so you have to go to your room and stay there for an hour, and you're going to miss out on your favourite TV show. So it's positive and personal, and in the second example, it's negative, but it's not personal. It's behavioural. You just stay focused. So why do you stay focused just on behaviour and not make it personal, like saying to the 3-year-old, you're a stupid girl, you're useless, I don't know why you're in this house, get out of here. Because as soon as you attack a child like that and get angry at them, they jump out of the calm nerve into the fight, flight, freeze. So depending on their personality, they'll either get angry at you, they'll get anxious around you, or they'll shut down and avoid, and they'll learn nothing. So you're wasting your time trying to explain something to a 3-year-old once they move out of the calm nerve. And that rule applies to 3-year-olds, 13, 23, 53 or 103-year-olds. They mightn't react the same way, but it has the same effect. They won't be listening and learning. That's why we follow the golden rule: positive personal, negative behavioural. And so when things are negative and taken personally, then you've lost respect or trust, and you're trying to force respect because you're getting frustrated. The person's listening, not listening to you, and you don't know how to deal with them, so you attack the person. You've become fearful of losing control and emotions, and instincts have taken over, and you've moved to the fight or flight stage. And what happens is then you end up with failure, shame, blame and attack, and there's no fix. Now let's have a look if we combine these two concepts, positive and personal and negative and behavioural. So on the axis, the horizontal one, we've got support, and on the vertical one, we've got challenge. And remember, challenge and support should be equal. And across in the middle, we've got the 4 columns, the positive and personal, the green one, and the negative and behavioural, the yellow one. But there's 2 other columns, one where I make it negative and personal, the first column, the red column, or positive and behavioural. So you could be in any one of those 4 columns. So to give you an example, let's say the government pay me $50,000 a year to hire a new person, and I hire you and pay you $40,000, and I'm allowed to keep the $10,000, but I only hired you because I wanted the $10,000. I'm a very disagreeable person, and I'm not interested in you. So I don't challenge you at all, or I start giving you all the jobs nobody else wants to do, and everyone can see you're not suited to it, and they start bullying you, but I don't do anything about it. Therefore, you've got too much challenge and no support, so you start to down-regulate your body, depending on what type of person you are. If you're an avoidant person, you'll start to feel shame, hopelessness and despair. If you're a very anxious person, you might feel panic and rejection. If you're a very angry person, you might feel rage or get paranoid fear, and you're not very happy working for me. But if I was a little bit better than that, and I start to support you a bit, I'm not attacking you personally, but I'm picking up all the mistakes you made, and I'm not giving you hardly any support, but I'm not making it personal. I'm just keep pointing out all the errors that you're making. I'll let everyone else point out all the errors you're making. And now what happens is it's not as bad, but it's still not good. Your despair becomes boredom, your shame becomes guilt, your rejection, you become critical, your rage becomes anger, your paranoid fear becomes fear. But then I'm a slightly different person. Now I'm a positive person, so I treat you positively with behaviour. So I'm patient with you, I give you self-control, I'm calm with you, I evaluate your performance, I give you good feedback, I encourage you to take risks and show a bit of courage. So it's getting a lot better to work for me. And finally, I make it positive and personal because I'm a totally different person. And I care about you and I listen to you and have empathy for you. I'm compassionate at the fact that you don't have a lot of knowledge, but I'm committed to you and prepared to accept your weaknesses. I respect you as a person and I trust that you'll do the right thing. It's a lot better working for me in column 4, the green column, positive and personal, than it is if you're working for someone in the negative and personal column. So we'll now have a look at the last of the 5 pairs of rules, that is inside versus outside. We've been encouraging you to stay inside yourself and use your support factors and build your trust and respect for yourself and acceptance and commitment for what you do. But if you don't do that and you develop a bad habit and you end up down the right-hand side of all those, too much concern, too much responsibility, over-challenged, taking things personally, you'll eventually then go outside yourself with bad habit. And when I mentioned earlier, I worked at a drug and alcohol centre for 5 years. And I talked to those guys, why did you originally start drinking alcohol? And originally they went outside themselves because they lacked courage. And there was an old saying in Alcoholics Anonymous that you find courage in a bottle. And so that's what literally happened. They socially couldn't mix with others, some of them, and they'd drink alcohol to be able to be social and mix. Others couldn't stand up to bullies, so they'd drink socially and they'd want to fight. So they were using alcohol as a courage to express themselves in ways they couldn't without alcohol. But alcohol can be a stimulant for courage, but it also can be a depressant for avoidance. Some people will binge drink to avoid, to get away from things, because they can't process them inside themselves. So sometimes we go outside ourselves and use alcohol. Some of the drug users would use marijuana because they couldn't find peace within inside themselves. They'd smoke bongs on the weekend because of the stress during the week or at night time because they couldn't find peace within inside themselves. But it doesn't only relate to drug and alcohol. People pleasers go outside themselves because they can't find acceptance within inside themselves. So they people please, trying to please others to get acceptance because they can't find it within inside themselves. Or people will get angry and try and force respect on others because they don't respect themselves and they don't respect others because they haven't got the ability to solve the problem without making it personal. So they force it through anger. So you can see you never go outside yourself. You stay inside yourself and fix it within. So the homework for this exercise, or this module 2, is to go for the ball, not the man. Go for the ball because it's the behaviour, not the man, which is personal. And so if you have a look at example of a group of 500 league footballers, number one player goes for the ball because when it comes back to support, he can trust and respect himself because he's got all the knowledge, skill and experience. Whereas player 500 doesn't trust and respect himself because he lacks knowledge, skill and experience. And so when the two get put onto each other, the player who lacks experience, player number 500, doesn't end up getting the ball because he can't get it. And so he attacks the man because he's weak as a footballer. And that applies to life. When you attack the person, you're weak because you haven't got enough knowledge, skill and experience to fix the problem. So the exercise for today is don't go for the man, go for the ball. Fix the behaviour or fix the process. Don't take it personally.